Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to give a shout out to Kellen and the Board Game Barrage for taking some time to help us out with the podcast. One of my favorite things about the hobby is the genuine camaraderie within board gamers, whether it's content creators, designers, publishers, or just enthusiasts. It's people like Kellen that remind me why I love this hobby. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Late Game Podcast, a podcast about all things board gaming, from rolling dice to painting minis and everything in between. I'm your host Tyler, and with me is Kenneth.
Hi.
And Russ.
How are you?
And you did it again.
Every now and then I got to.
No complaints, but still it knocked me back a bit. This week we're simplifying things, or at least attempting to, with an episode about simplicity in gaming. But first, let's talk about what we've played recently. What about you, Kenneth?
So on the theme of simplicity, I played Pipeline, which throws simplicity right out the window. Pipeline is awesome, very like hardcore economic game. You play oil barons. You are trying to build a pipe network that upgrades your oil so that you can sell it, make contracts, fulfill orders. And it's just a really tight, really tough economic game with a spatial puzzle in the form of the pipelines. So you got 3 different colors of pipes. Most pieces have either 1 or 2 segments of any given color, and up to all 3 different colors. And they start spinning around each other and weaving and connecting, and I had one of my pipelines, I could upgrade my oil in one shot from the bottom grade to the top grade. One of them, I could only upgrade like one step at a time. Like Alex trounced me. He's really good at Euros. So it wasn't a terrible surprise that he did. I think a big part of it is that I took a small, easy to fulfill contract at the start. And so with contracts, you have to fulfill them each year. The game is only played over the course of 3 years, with the first year being 8 turns, the second year being 6 turns, and the third year being 4 turns. Remarkably quick for that type of game. It really felt like just as we were getting going, it was over.
So what was the play time total for your? Because it was the first game,
learning game. It was probably right around 2 hours, maybe 2 and some change.
So that's not bad.
Realistically, I think if me and Alex sat down and played it again, we would keep it definitely under 2, probably closer to an hour and a half. And if me and Alex were to sit down and say, you two, we would probably keep it under or around 3, with 2 of us really more or less knowing what we're doing, and the 2 new people.
Right.
You know,
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean turns. So there's it is kind of a worker placement game.
Okay.
But you have one worker. Like it's a worker placement game because you physically take a guy and you put him in a place. But really it's a game of choose the one thing you're going to do, moving on. Choose your one action, moving on. And there's a way to turn it into 2 actions, but it's do one thing or up to 2.
So on your turn you do 1 action?
Yeah. You do up to 2 actions because there's a secondary action on each worker space that you can pay $10 to do the secondary action.
Okay.
Interesting. It kind of looks like, from what I've seen on BGG and stuff, I've seen a couple of shots of the game board, and it almost looks like a version of like a route building with the pipes.
Definitely an element of route building.
Do you guys remember the old card game from the 80s called Waterworks?
Yeah, I've got it in my closet.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, it looks similar to, for sure.
No, I never.
And then
I have no idea.
The game is set up. There's a lot of variability in setup, right? When
tons
things are laid out.
Yeah, absolutely tons. I know that we didn't see. I mean, we maybe saw a maximum of half of the pipeline tiles. There's upgrades, of which I got 3 of the first step upgrades of 5 different categories that each have 3 steps. And there was, I think, 3 other upgrades that weren't in our game because you use 5, and I want to say the game comes with 8 different upgrade trees. And then the board itself there's 4 spots that are on the board that are always in the same spot. And then there's 4 tiles that you kind of mix up and deal out randomly to determine the other spot. So, like for refined market 1 can be matched up with either buying machines and pipes or getting contracts and loans, or with I can't remember the other things, but like the 4 things on the board always stay in the same spot, but what they work with changes. And there was once or twice that I was like, why can't that one be over there? Because I need to do both of those things right now. Yeah, really tight economic game. Beautiful. Like I'm 90% sure that Ian O'Toole did the art.
Yes,
and
he did.
It is gorgeous. I mean, like the pictures really don't do it justice. It's, the pipelines, they're clean, they're fairly simple tiles, but when you get a whole network of them, man, it just looks really, really nice.
I kind of feel, and I've heard people complain a little bit about the artwork, and they didn't like it for simplicity, and it wasn't enough of, the cover art and all that. But I feel like, for me, it's going to be the same thing it was with opening Lisboa, being another Ian O'Toole art project, in that when I opened it, it was nothing like the videos I saw online. It was a lot less pastel, and there was more vibrance in the actual thing in person.
See, with
you need
Pipeline,
simplicity in art sometimes to provide
sure.
you what you need without the busyness.
Yeah, with Pipeline, I mean, the nature of the pipeline tiles, they are busy, and your pipeline network becomes very busy. So the tiles on an individual basis are really clean and really crisp with vibrant colors. You can easily tell which one's which. I'm not colorblind, so I don't know whether or not that applies to colorblind people. But the pipes are silver, orange, and blue, and I've never heard of someone having a problem with any of those colors with colorblindness. I'm not an expert. If there is a trigger there with colorblindness, I could see that being a problem, but everything else is really, really clean.
That's awesome.
And there's just so much going on with the board and with your player boards and stuff. Like, it's a really nice balance of art that looks good and graphic design that is extremely functional.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's a necessity for a game like that.
For sure. Pipeline's rad, though.
So it's really tight economy, and then isn't it, if I've heard right about it, like you kind of have to invest, stay really tight, and then you gain a lot at the end. Like it's...
Yeah.
Like you can end with a good amount of dollars, but it's hard to get there. Like,
so our end scores, Alex was $600 and something. I want to say somewhere around $650, a little north or south of $650. I was like $449 or $460 something. I don't know. I was around $450. So he beat me by $200. But what was crazy is like he had a couple of like $100 sale turns in the game before I ever had one. When I saw that my score was around 450, I fully expected him to be like well over 1,000 because of how much it felt like he outplayed me during the game. But he had those couple of $100 turns before I did, and yet still there was times where he was down to $1 or $2 going, I can't do the thing. And like, you go, it's swingy. I mean, like your economy is swingy, right. Like, I mean, there's $500 like chips, because the money is on like cardboard chips. There's like $500 ones, and for the first year and a half of the game, so the first 10 to 12 turns, I was going, those aren't necessary. Like, I don't see how that could even. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, another game. Yeah, I could see those like they were used in end game scoring. I could definitely see them being used in the game by people who really know what they're doing and have a strategy and have some experience with it. And it's still like, even though you're using those big numbers, it still felt really tight.
That's awesome.
Oh, cool.
It's awesome though.
I look forward to trying it. That's a Pipeline.
Yes, Pipeline.
Awesome.
Fantastic game.
Well, what about you, Russ? What did you play this week?
Finally played one of your favorites that I absolutely adored with Anachrony. I really enjoyed it. It's one of those games where I enjoyed the play, but then my like of the game grew the more I've thought about it since.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, I want to buy it, but I know it's not going to appeal to a lot of people, so I'm okay just playing your copy.
It's awesome solo.
Right. So, and I thought I'd heard that the theme didn't come through much in that game, but I felt, and maybe it's just the way I played, I kind of felt like I was getting into it, even though I was yellow and I was supposed to, capitalize on my scientists and that. I was killing my scientists to make my corporation better. And I didn't evacuate. And I know it's just a game, and I'm not saying I got attached to my people, but it was kind of weird being like, well,
you clearly didn't get attached to your people. You were constantly
throwing them
murdering
away.
them.
Right, but it was
but
it was in the name of progress, and
yeah,
but then I didn't
just like the Holocaust.
Okay, but then I no. But see, then I didn't evacuate, so my scientists knew what they were getting into when they signed on board, but not being able to evacuate kind of bothered me, which it shouldn't because it allowed me to win
And continue killing your people.
Yeah,
And have the satisfaction of knowing that no one was left alive.
But so with some of these new games I've been playing lately, Studying Emerald, Anachrony, and some of these others that are more complex with their actions and everything you can do, I've been a lot more focused on just the mechanics I understand. And one thing that I'd really been excited for in Anachrony was the time travel. So I really wanted to focus on that. And then the other track with the waking the guys up, I didn't want to be a tyrant, even though I kind of did, but then I didn't want to be, I really struggle sometimes to be the bad guy in games. I like when I can embrace and be the bad guy, but strategy-wise, I struggle with that sometimes because I don't like the repercussions. Like if you're the tyrant, it kind of knocks that down. I could see the points that I would lose, and in turn the water that I was spending. So I just focused on those two tracks, but I really loved the time travel a little bit, and it was interesting because you were doing the time travel too, but you had that building that I really wanted. So that's probably why I focused on that. I wanted to see how it worked because you were able to remove the little tiles from the past.
Yeah, I got rid of the warp tiles with the building through using a scientist.
Yeah, but without the benefit of going back in time. So as we were playing, I was like, man, that's a really good building. But then
it prevented my own progress on the time travel track, which eventually gives you victory points at the end of the game.
Yeah, so I think if you use that building, you want to, I think,
chase other avenues for sure.
Well, or like use 2 of the warp tiles so that you can time travel back, get one.
Right.
Anyway, I mean, there was a lot of strategy there, but I really enjoyed the time travel aspect.
I hated it.
Well, you started out really bad with that roll.
It just
keep biting me in
didn't
the
work
ass.
for me at all. Like I think I time traveled twice, and I mean the end one, it was because hey, I'm only going to roll the die a total of 1 time, so it can only bite me so hard. But yeah, that like the way that the time travel worked for whatever reason. I mean, obviously it's me because like you guys were time traveling just fine and like using it and making it work for you. I
misused it some though.
Yeah, but
not enough to lose.
Only but some. I strictly misused it. Like I exclusively misused it.
If I would have time traveled at that one point to get the titanium, I was around behind that. I had enough other cubes that I could have built 2 buildings because we had that like end game tile. So there is There's a lot of different strategy in that game. Plus the variability, like you were showing us after, there's like all kinds of other tracks and
Yeah.
all
And I haven't
that.
even dipped into the asymmetrical sides of the board,
Yeah.
which now that you guys know how, it's going to be easier
Well,
to
and you
do.
know when we were looking at the evacuation thing, I was like, oh, yours way better. You just need purple cubes. And mine seemed really hard, but like in all asymmetrical games, there's an added layer to it because at the end of the game, I get points. I would have got points for my science tokens again, which, then the double points would have been unfair. I just, much like I did Valhalla the week before, I didn't focus on my leader. I mean, I did focus on my leader because he allowed me to use the scientist, but
Right.
not like the holistic of using my scientist, because I was using my scientist to be the cannon fodder for my building, the dark matter, and
Yeah, I would personally think like so. My take on Anachrony, like I'm not gonna say I loved it, but it was good. It was cool. It was a solid worker placement. And as far as like people who say that like the theme doesn't come through, the only reason that the theme doesn't come through to me is because it's a worker placement and there's only so much theme that can come through in any given worker placement. Like that mechanic doesn't always lend itself to theme. But as far as that goes, like the theme felt strong to me. I think that a big help for that is that you've got the plastic mechs,
Right.
and on the one hand, it's kind of it could be viewed as a damning thing to say about a game,
Yeah.
and on the other hand, like it just is what it is. I really liked sticking. I liked putting the guys into the thing because it was really like. It's great the way that it works. You take your little cardboard,
satisfying.
Your little cardboard worker of the 4 different types: the scientists, the engineers, the administrators, and the geniuses.
Yeah,
and they've got their little logo at the top of the chit. And then you slide the chit down into the mech thing with only the little logo sticking out of the top, and it's like, okay, this mech is being piloted by a scientist,
right.
And then he's going to go out into the world and do things. And that I felt was just awesome. I mean, other than that, like rock solid worker placement game, the time travel thing didn't work for me. I would probably play it again. I would probably avoid the time travel and try and see how that works because I still don't get it. It's just not intuitive to me. And maybe on a third play, I would try and actually dip my feet back into that.
For those that haven't played it, one thing that I loved about it as far as worker placement goes, you have your shared places that you put your mechs, your exosuits.
Right.
Right, they're exosuits.
Mm-hmm.
And you put your workers in the exosuits, and then you place them on a shared board with shared actions. But then you have a tableau that you buy buildings and put those buildings on your tableau, and those workers, instead of going into an exosuit, can go onto your tableau. So you're creating your own worker placement board. Which, like, that all to me melded together. I forced myself to learn the time travel. Like early on, it wasn't making sense. But then, like, specifically choosing certain resources I need. Like I used it for an exosuit at one point, but then I also used it for an exosuit at another point and didn't even get to use that exosuit. So I had to time travel back and do that, which was actually a cool little loop because I wanted to go back in time, and the exosuit wasn't hard to like give back. It wasn't like a resource where I had to give back. If I didn't have the worker for the exosuit, I could just, I'm going to take an exosuit and then time travel back and get rid of it. I would have loved to have the worker to do it, but I think I killed him. But
sounds about right.
But yeah, so kind of having the tableau where you build your own worker placement board,
right,
with the shared worker placement board and the limited number of spaces on the shared board and how the timing to get on there and what you wanted to do was really nice too.
And the shared council actions kind of expanding on what you're able to reach and using that as a way to get the first player token. You can spend extra water, to be first before somebody else gets the free or after somebody's already gotten the free version of that action, which is, I like the flexibility in that.
And then the buildings. I love that, hey, there's a building I want to build there. I'll just do it next time. No, that might be covered. If it's on the right side of the pile, right, it's going to be covered. So it really creates a tough situation. Like,
Right.
ooh, I need to build that, but I can't this turn, but I want to do that. So I'm looking forward to another play of that for sure.
Me too. Well, I've got a question for you, Kenneth. You mentioned something about, it could be a detriment to the game itself because of how good the exosuits are, the actual exosuits.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that it could be a detriment to the
Euro
game itself. I'm
players
saying
don't like
that it could
plastic.
sound bad when I
Right.
say that that's my favorite thing about it.
Well, I've heard that quite a few times. A lot of people say, there's no other way to play this but without, you got to have the minis.
Is there a version without them?
Yes. The base box, the game that I have, it didn't come like that. It
Oh.
came, I had to spend and, get the extra box with the minis in it. Originally, you just get cardboard tiles that are the exosuits.
Yeah, I
And
can
they-
see that being
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. If that's what we played with, my opinion would definitely, it wouldn't be as high as it is because that was, like I said, is my favorite part.
Right.
What
well,
it would
yours are
be
also
is
painted pretty awesome.
what it would be is a pretty good worker placement game with a time travel gimmick that I hated.
The question I have is, do you think that Cthulhu Wars would work with cardboard versions of the monsters?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No,
Well,
Cthulhu,
I can
like,
appreciate that.
The thing, I mean, like technically it would work, but it would not. It wouldn't be anywhere near as satisfying. I mean, like
Right.
I think that's
Like
the theme,
Root-
right? That's where the
that's
theme
part of
kinda
it. Like
comes
that's
in.
part of the like Cthulhu Wars to me is it's very much an experience. You know, it's
Yeah.
all these asymmetric things, and you're like, chances are you're learning what the other people's are things your factions do while you're learning your own factions, and like
Right.
you've got the strategies, and all the while you're moving around these giant chunks of plastic, and they're really colorful. Like it's very much an experience, you know, and it's a fairly short game, which I feel also like it shows that it's more an experience type of game than a strictly strategy game. I mean, you're also
Right.
rolling like a million dice, and you've got the asymmetric powers, and like there's so much to it that like there's strategy to be found, and there's strategies with each faction, but that's not to me the meat and potatoes of the game. That is the experience of I played Cthulhu Wars and this happened.
Right.
You know, where a game like Root, which is definitely highly asymmetric, very combat focused, very like there's a lot of similarities, but it doesn't have the giant chunks of plastic. Still an experience, but to me that's more of a strategy tactical type of game than a let's just ride with the experience, you know,
Right.
which is why in my experience I've seen people get more salty at Root because they are trying harder than I've seen with Cthulhu Wars, because either way you're just happy doing the experience. You
That's
know
a
what I
good
mean?
point. That's a good point.
And I mean that certainly isn't going to apply to everyone, but in my experience that's what I've seen.
Right. Well, after having the mechs and having them painted, I don't think that I'll ever be able to, look at the game without them the same. I don't know that I would, like you said, have half the amount of fun or even be interested in playing it without them, because there's something to be said about slotting your workers right into that little exosuit.
Yeah, it's satisfying.
Very. Well, for me, I played a game with my family that my son got for Christmas that he's been bugging me to play quite often, which is a wonderful problem to have for me lately.
Yeah.
And it's a really simple dice chucker, and I could see it honestly becoming a really good party game with some beverages eventually, because there's different actions that you'll have to do. The game is called Terror Eyes, and you're basically just rolling these extremely chunky dice that there's 3 of them, and they all have different versions of eyeballs on them. And on top of that, you've got basically a blueprint of what eye configuration you need to roll. And one person's rolling for eyes, and the other players are taking turns rolling a little red dice trying to take away that ability or finish the puzzle before the next person can. And I actually just glad that my son wants to throw down with a game.
Hey, if as long as it's a game that like is enough of a game to keep your attention,
Right.
that he wants to play, because like as into gaming as I am with my little niece running around, she always wants to play games, and hers is like there's like a shark game that's basically like the old fishing things with the snapping
Right.
plastic fish. There's like a one of those that she has, and then I've got her a couple of games geared towards like little kids and learning,
Mm-hmm.
which I think would be great, except for that she essentially like her mom gives her no structure. So me sitting down and saying, these are the rules of the game, she goes, no, I'm going to do this. And it's like, well, whatever. And like, I mean, we're talking colors and counting, you know, are
Sure.
the mechanisms of the two games that I have bought her. And in the best of scenarios, that's going to get kind of old for me pretty quick, but I'd go with it to help her learn.
Absolutely.
In the version where she's not going to pay attention to any sort of rules and doesn't care about any sort of structure,
Right.
I couldn't care less to play it. Like, I just don't want to. It's like, hey, to my sister-in-law, you play that with her. Teach her to play it so that I can play. Like, if you can get it in her head that there's
Get the
a
ball
structure,
rolling.
that there's some sort of structure there,
Yeah.
I will play within that structure with her.
Right.
But I don't have the energy to create that structure in her mind. So it's cool that it, like, your kid wants to play a game at all, and extra cool that it's something that is keeping your attention.
Well, and kind of like what you were saying, it also is a benefit for me and my son because he wants to play by the rules that are in the game, not by his own.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this kind of gains some traction and gets his interest in a couple of other things that we've got. But so far, so good. So I'll just keep playing it.
Yeah,
and
for
another
sure.
thing with the game is that I think could really lend to a party side, but also wears me out is there's actions that you have to take if you're the guy rolling the dice and somebody rolls the exclamation point, and you basically have to like balance it on your head or crawl under the table or run around the table and man, I am so not in shape, and that game reminds me very quickly that there's things that I was not expecting to do. This is a board game. I'm supposed to be sitting here enjoying myself, I thought. But
Yeah, that
no,
sounds
it's
like
been fun.
a great drinking game, and or like us drinking, and maybe Russ takes an Ambien.
Sure. I'm in. Well, why don't we simplify things and talk about simplicity in board gaming?
So I've been doing a lot of thinking. What do you guys think of when you say simplicity in board games? What does that mean to you? Because I've been trying to figure that out.
It certainly doesn't mean Teotihuacan.
And not just the pronunciation.
Yeah, like nothing about that game simple, up to and including the name.
I guess
Kind of,
flipping,
though.
the only thing I could say is flipping the dice from 2 to 3, ascending. That's about it.
In all fairness, I've never actually played it, so maybe it is more simple.
but I
than
No,
would-
it
you're more
sounds,
right than I'm
but,
giving
like,
it credit for.
But I think there is an argument that is simple in a way.
well, yeah, it's an argument you've made repeatedly, and then you say things about the game to defeat your own argument. It's like a one-man fight.
Yeah.
So, like I was kind of mentioning, one of the problems that I've got fairly regularly in gaming is I have a hard time getting my family to the table. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with my evolving interest in heavier games.
Oh,
And-
I don't know. Have you evolved into heavier games?
Yeah, On Mars should be here this week. My family, they'd rather not play a game that takes longer than an hour, and they would admittedly prefer that it takes less than that, if possible. But there's a couple of games that I was able to get them into this past year, aside from, you know, the play similarities. I noticed that they all kind of have another link, and that's the simplicity in the rules and mechanics. So for me, it's simplicity in rules and mechanics and the teachability. That's the thing that I'm kind of looking for in gaming. But then there are games like Lisboa that I've been learning that it's really simple, but there's a lot of depth. And so that depth of strategy kind of adds, another element for me as a gamer. And I feel like there are more and more of these games that are simple but deep at the same time, that are finding that right blend. And
Yeah.
it's
So
nice to
I
have
think there
those.
is a lot. I think you can have a lot of depth to a simple game. I think it's something like chess. Granted, chess isn't the easiest game to teach, but there is tons of depth there as to what you want to do or what you need to do to win. So I think for me, when I think about simplicity in games, it's what is a turn encompass, and I think that just comes down to like, how do I teach a new gamer this? Because the Court of the Dead, like in and of themselves, those actions are all pretty simple. We got like nine actions per round or something like that.
And
Phases of a round.
They don't feel like they necessarily belong together.
Right.
So to me, simplicity, there's two different types of simplicity. There is and like there one is distinctly good and one is distinctly bad. And they tend to be like they're related. So a game with simple mechanics, but good like strategic depth, that's perfect to me.
Right.
If I can,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that like you guys didn't love it, and I'm pretty sure that I like it more than either of you. Wildlands, the fact that I could teach that game in 5 minutes, but it's never going to be the same game twice. That is a really good simplicity of mechanics to depth of strategy ratio to me.
Yeah.
Like the execution may not be perfect, but that's a really good one hitting the ratio.
The thing with Wildlands for me is, for the type of game that it is, I quite enjoyed it. I just find myself the more I play those kind of one, I don't know what it is about them. Like I would way rather play Wildlands over the Funko universe. Like,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people love the Funkoverse, but so it's not that I didn't like it, but it has that simplicity like you're talking about, where it's
that's what I'm saying. Is like it's easy to teach. It's simple mechanics, but there could be that strategic depth. And I mean, right from the very start, between choosing your starting locations and choosing where the person to your left is going to be placing their gems, like there is plenty of strategic depth. And then how you're going to approach it, what you're going to focus on, like there's plenty of strategic depth with really simple mechanics, and that is great. What is not good is a game that has strategic simplicity. A strictly better way to play is a strictly worse game to play, in my opinion. I don't want to play something that is on rails. I don't want to play a game that is solved.
Right.
I know there are beloved games that are close to that. Twilight Struggle comes to mind. I know there are hardcore players of Twilight Struggle that they have their opening moves, and for me, there would be a lot of strategic depth because I'm not familiar with the game. But at a certain point, I know I would get over it because that game becomes somewhat scripted depending on what your opening hand of cards is and stuff. That one may not be the best example for like strategic simplicity because it doesn't have it from the outset, but with enough play, that does become the case. I mean, same thing with like chess.
Yeah.
I don't understand how a grandmaster could stay interested in the game because they know there's essentially like a handful of opening moves that determine almost the entire game.
I think it depends.
For me playing chess, I honestly don't even remember off the top of my head what every piece does. So for me, there's plenty of strategic depth to be found in chess.
Yeah.
But for a grandmaster, I don't see how it doesn't just feel simple.
Well, I think it becomes more of playing the person across from you as opposed to playing the game. And I enjoy chess like you do. Like I enjoy it to a level, but I don't want to sit there and study and figure everything out. So Star Wars Risk is one that I really enjoy, and I enjoy playing with my neighbor to where we both have strategies depending on which side we're on. So but there's some luck to it, right? What cards you get. So it's not so much just like a strict strategy, but so for me, that's pretty fun where it's like, oh, last play he did this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to counter what he did. And then he does the same stuff where it's not so scripted, but it's like adjusting strategies based on how we keep playing the game. So I really like those kind of things as well.
Right.
It's interesting because, so we talked about deck builders last week, and I was thinking, I think a simple deck builder, if I'm just looking at simplicity, is like DC deck builder. There's one currency, you either fight or you purchase, and you kind of do it the same way. Like, you just either fight the villains on the one side or you use that currency to buy cards. So there's not like different currency for different things. It's a lot easier to teach. Where trains, yes, it's a simple deck builder. The actions are a little bit different, but there's a board to it, and you have to build the track, and it's a little bit harder to teach, even though the action of taking cards is kind of the same thing. So I've been thinking about that a lot this week, as far as like simplicity, I think, is how easy it is to teach.
Yeah, I would almost say two things. One, like, total side note. Last week when we were talking about deck builders, I mentioned Apex Theropod and how it might have a Kickstarter coming. That is live now. It went live
the day after we recorded.
The day after we recorded, which was the day before the episode dropped.
Yeah.
It was insane timing, but that game is rad. Support that for like $95. You can get
amazing
the base
dinosaur
game,
art,
a better box than the original had, and all of the old expansions. I'm very excited about it. Highly recommend it.
Do it.
Back to simplicity, I almost feel like I personally would gauge the simplicity of a game by how many times I have to play it before I feel confident teaching it without going straight to the rule book. So Wildlands, extremely simple game.
Yeah.
I want to say that I referenced a couple of like edge case questions that you guys had in the book, but I taught that off the top of my head. Prior to that, I had played one game by myself to see if the mechanics were actually as simple as they read, because I read through the rule book and I was like, it can't be that easy, can it? I mean, we're talking about a Martin Wallace game. Right. And it really, really is. It's that simple of a game. I played it, both sides, and then came to you guys and I was like, here's what you do. This means this, and like I said, there was a couple of edge case questions that you guys had that I was like, I don't know. Let me look into the book. But other than that, it was all off the top of my head. That is a simple game.
Yeah.
We're going to sit down and play brass after this, and I can definitely set up the game, and I can do most of the things, but I'm going to be opening that book. I know I'm going to.
Right.
And I've played brass. This will be the fourth or fifth time that I've played brass now. And one more, if you include Lancashire, which is essentially it's super similar. I'm still not confident enough to think that I'm not going to be in that book. I'm going to be far less than I was the first time or the second time,
right.
But it's not a simple game.
So with Wildlands, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. It kind of reminded me of, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but like a watered down version of Shadespire, which can be a wonderful thing because simplifying some of those mechanics and, using a better way at teaching somebody like my son, that's going to get him into a bigger game like Shadespire later on. And so, with that, another thing that I wanted to mention as far as the simplicity goes is you can play to your opponent with the way that you line things up at the very beginning and with the way that you play throughout the game, and kind of, it's not one of those that you're just going to punish the other player for the most part, and there are ways that you can make them enjoy it but still enjoy it yourself. I can see that reach.
Yeah, for sure.
So games like Santorini, Azul, and Horrified, for me, those are the three that with my family that I played this year that they jump to mind as far as simplicity. And those games take maybe 5 minutes, but no more than 10 minutes to teach. And they still provide that depth of strategy and simplicity mix that feed my mindset as well as keep them interested for the most part. So with, like Santorini, it's essentially sort of a 3D chess where you're building up instead of just trying to capture
and I
something.
think those there's a theme to that one, but more the abstract strategy that. I think that's a good example of a way to look at it. If it's an abstract strategy and you need to continually go back to a rule book, for me, it's kind of missed the mark. Well, it might be a great game. I love in a game like that an ability to develop a strategy instead of just worrying about rules all the time. Like Santorini, move, build.
Yeah.
Move, build, and then I can get to the point where it's like I'm developing a strategy on how I want to play.
Right.
Hive is like probably one step more complex than that, where like I go on kicks of playing Hive a whole bunch. And those first few games, I need to have the list of the insects with their unique abilities. I need to have that in front of me. But by the third game or so, I've got them all again.
Yeah.
And there's like 7 or whatever. So like there's quite a few different pieces that do different things. But the simplicity of either place one of the guys that you haven't put out, or move it with its unique movement rules.
Well, and teaching people Hive, because it's hey, these are what all these do, and then as you play, it kind of clicks with them. Oh, I see why I would want to do this. That makes sense. So there's depth there. So I've been playing the Bears and the Bees from Grandpa Beck's.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a discard game.
Yeah.
But I took it to a wrestling tournament. The kids like it, and they're just kind of hexagonal shaped cards. But it's just a discard game, but it's based on colors on the side. So you have to match to build, and you kind of build this, what looks like Hive, because you build this big map. And I'm really enjoying that in the simplicity of it's a discard game, but there's strategy. Like, how do I want to set up my moves later?
Right.
And even if I can't, there's luck in it because it's a discard game. It's still enjoyable as opposed to the simplicity of Uno, which not to say I can't enjoy Uno here and there.
But see, I would even go as far as to say like that's another element of simplicity is the like relatable context or contextual relatability, So with air quotes, everyone has played Uno.
Yeah.
So if you can build on that framework, you've simplified the game. Everyone has played chess, so you can take that as a starting point for Hive.
Right.
If someone has played a worker placement game, you can start there and build out, and everything will feel more simple than for someone who hasn't.
Yeah, those are good examples because I've so I have my other
and same
game
thing with
group.
deck building.
Right,
also.
my neighborhood group that we get together once a month. We just added a new player like 3 or 4 months ago. It's funny trying to teach him new games when the other guys in the group were not gamers a year and a half ago, but now they're like, they can relate to him and be like, oh, we were there too, because we played Quacks. Pretty simple game. Honestly, not as simple as it seems once you start playing it, but because describing it is pretty, there's a lot to take in. But everybody else,
unique for a non-gamer, but once
everybody else at the table was
in.
like, oh, so this is like a deck builder. I was like, yeah, so it's like a deck builder. So it's funny seeing these guys where they can relate to games, which was intentional. Over the year, I've kind of showed them base games of here and there. And I've noticed the same thing where I just added Carnival of Monsters to my library. It used to be Seven Wonders. It took one play of Seven Wonders trying to teach non-gamer Seven Wonders, and I heard it was a great gateway. It's not. I will argue that all day. It's not a great gateway game because there's way too much iconography that it's just too much to take in.
Yeah.
Carnival of Monsters, same idea, so much more streamlined.
For sure.
So it's kind of, I still have Seven Wonders. I love Seven Wonders, but non-gamers, I'm not going to teach them a drafting game of that. I'd much rather do Carnival of Monsters and and they can kind of get the idea of lands and how lands work and that. So it's
almost like a lot of these earlier simple games or simplified versions of games, they're stepping stones to
Yeah.
get you to the next.
I think it's
level
important to have
of-
those in your library.
Yeah.
I think it's important. You might not like some of those simple games, right? Like I've told you guys, I'm going to keep Champions of Midgard without the expansions and stuff, mainly because you guys have it, and I don't want to overload it because that's a gateway game for me in my library. I'd have other stuff that I would want them to get to as much as I love that game.
Right.
So I think having those baseline games is important.
For sure.
Where it's like, oh, we're going to teach you this mechanic.
And to me, that relates in a lot of ways back to my own personal gauge for simplicity. How often do you need to pull the book out to teach the base game of Champions of Midgard? You know, how much time do you got to spend in the book?
Yeah.
You understand it. It's simple enough. Whether Champions of Midgard is a simple game, like regardless of where it falls on the scale, you've played it enough that you know it, you've internalized it, and it has become at very least simple for you, which will simplify it for anyone who is playing it with you because
Yeah.
you can explain it in your own words.
Right.
For,
Well, I think
for
what
lack of a
helps-
better term.
What helps Champions of Midgard as far as simplicity for a worker placement is the journeys and the monsters. Because in a lot of worker placements, it's you get a lot of stuff to get other stuff, but it's hard for some not quote unquote non-gamers to conceptualize the benefit. Where in Champions of Midgard, it's like you need food and water to go on a boat to kill monsters. Like they can kind of conceptualize that.
And really, with Champions of Midgard, another thing that works for the gateway thing is there's the dice rolling element, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
You are out battling monsters. You're
Yeah.
killing them. You're trying to gain those points. And there's the visual. They look cool. There's the dice rolling, and your guys die and stuff like that. My wife really liked Champions of Midgard. My wife, it has become very clear, does not like worker placement games because without that little bit of excitement, they can feel
Yeah.
kind of boring and kind of samey. You know, like a worker placement, similar to a deck builder, it needs to do something different.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be with Anachrony and the Sweet Max and the time track that's different, that's unique, or with Abomination and the thematics and building the creature and upgrading it. Like
Right.
there are things that they each do differently. I can guarantee you that my wife would not like if we played Champions of Midgard and then immediately played Lords of Waterdeep. I think that would have stopped her from trying the following like 3 or 4 worker placement games that she has grown to. She isn't into it.
Sure.
But if we'd have followed up something as simple and fun and exciting as Champions of Midgard with something simple and dry and, in my opinion, boring,
Yeah.
like Lords of Waterdeep, she would have immediately went, wait, is this how most of these games are? Because I'm done. I don't even want to try the
Yeah.
other 3 that she did try.
Well, I think. Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
Well, one of the things with like Champions that you were talking about is the intuitive mechanics. The fact that we all understand some of the basics of what you'd
Right.
want to do as a Viking in this scenario. Being able to put yourself in the game, not just as a player, that's another thing that can really help with simplifying the mechanics and getting a grip on understanding the game, which, you know, with like, in Abomination's case too, that theme pulls me in so much that I, picked it up fairly quickly and was not only hooked because it was a fun game, but the theme made me that scientist and
I'm very much that way. If I've there are games that have like Root where it has like a walk through, do these actions.
Yeah.
I can't conceptualize. It tells me to do something and I don't understand why.
Right.
Probably lose my patience with it, probably more than I should, but I need to understand why would I do this? Why would I take this action? And I need to somewhat wrap my head around it theme wise.
Yeah.
Like it could be a dry game, but if I don't understand the theme, even if I have to put myself somewhere, I don't really either enjoy the game or understand why I'm doing something.
Right.
So you guys know that I have a lot of my Kalak shelf is dedicated to Eric Lang. I think one of the things that I love about him as a designer is his games are pretty simple. There's a lot of depth to them, and there might be a lot of, like Death May Die, there's things throughout a turn that you have to do, but even that is pretty simple. It's easy to teach. So
Eric Lang is, in my opinion, really good with the games of his that I really like.
Yeah.
I almost can't even talk that much about Blood Rage at this point. I played it like once or twice. It's been quite a while. I didn't love it. It hasn't stayed in my mind. But with the games of his that I do like, there seems to always be, he likes to go with the, you do one thing or two things or maybe three things on your turn with a small menu of relatively simple things. And then the strategy from there is choosing the right menu items in the right order at the right time. Is this turn a good turn to move, or is it a good turn to attack? Should you move and then attack? Should you attack and then move? Should you take a minute and restore your health or your whatever other resources?
Yeah.
He is really good at simplifying complexity, because at the end of the day, the menu becomes complex. If you had to do all of those things in one turn, that would be a nightmare. But the fact that he goes, do one, do two, do three kind of thing, and here's the menu, you start understanding each piece more as you only have to do one or two or three of them per turn.
Yeah, and I think doing, I've started to not, I don't want to say not like, I enjoy games that have very simplistic rounds, if there's rounds, or just what you do on a turn.
Yeah.
Wingspan, Tapestry. Like Tapestry may seem complex to some people as gamers because they look at the strategy. It's a super easy game to teach. There's 4 tracks. You move your guy or your cube on one track, and then you get the benefit of that track. There's strategy that players start to learn, but as far as teaching it to a new player, it's you do this. So the first play might be rough. Same with Wingspan. There's 4 actions. You do that. Birds add a lot to what they can do later. Break the rules, as people say.
Right.
But I've really come to enjoy those like Stonemeyer games, Eric Lang games, and there's plenty of others too where it's very simple action. Don't overcrowd it to where it's like, oh, you're a new player. Here's your list of menu of all the things that you're going to do on your turn, and then it's somebody else's turn, and the downtime that it eliminates.
I really feel like Cthulhu Wars does that well, while adding the complexity of you've got asymmetric factions that look for certain conditions. Like you have achievements. You have to do a thing to unlock another ability. And that's where the complexity is. Because at the start of the game, when you don't have any powers, pretty much every faction moves the same, does combat essentially the same. You look at how many dice each character rolls, and you score points the same. You've got to have the gates that are controlled. Like the nuts and bolts of the game, it can be broke down really simple. The complexity literally comes in the way that you play. And I mean, one of the conditions for winning, you have to have unlocked all 6 of your abilities. So you have to inflict that complexity on yourself.
Yeah.
But it can be done at your own speed, at your own in your own distinct order.
Right.
And but that my guys becoming more complex rarely impacts everyone at the table. If I get an ability that's a combat ability, it can affect the person that I'm attacking. And then they're taking in a little bit of my complexity while I'm probably taking in a little bit of their complexity through combat or some movement actions, but it's on a one at a time basis that you kind of introduce that element of complexity
exactly.
to one person at the table directly, and everyone else kind of watching, going, "Oh, you can do that. Okay, that's broken."
Well,
Yeah, with a game like that, it kind of unfolds the complexity at a good pace.
Yeah.
It doesn't just throw it all in your lap at once and end up with this overwhelming mess. It lets you, like I said, build on things at your own pace as a player and in whatever direction that your faction is leading you to, which is another benefit to the game itself.
Yeah, my whole family really likes that one, which to me is a testament to a degree of simplicity.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the complexity of, I think those games, those territory control games that are simple, but they are a territory control game with asymmetric abilities, Glorantha, Cthulhu Wars, even the Chaos in the Old World. There's a ton going on, but when the nuts and bolts of combat is roll dice with Cthulhu Wars and Glorantha, this is a hit, this is a push, and I don't have to sit there and track how much damage one hit kills a guy. Like,
Yeah.
while some people might get bothered, I love that simplicity. I don't have to sit there and track how much damage all my guys have in what square. It's like,
Yeah,
it just
for sure.
works. Now, not all systems can be that clean and work as good as they do, but I think Peterson does a great job with Cthulhu Wars and Glorantha where it does.
Yeah. A couple of really simple to teach games that I haven't played in a long time that maybe this coming weekend I might have to try and get the kids to play is Century, which I have the Golem edition of the first one. So it's not like,
Do you know how hard that thing is to find?
I don't.
It's
It's
drastically not easy.
It's really easy for me. I just go into
I
the
know.
room where all of my games are.
Which is why Micah
I
wants it,
just
because he
get it.
played your copy. And
One of these days, I'm going to have to get the second one that's in the Golem edition, Eastern Mountains or whatever.
yeah.
But my stepdaughter loves Century. That's a great game. And it's fairly simple engine builder, resource management.
It's a great teaching more concepts of other games.
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, you can plan ahead to a certain degree. You can adapt and react to your opponents without getting too weighed down in craziness. Another simple game that I haven't played in a long time that I want to get out, that I'm suddenly feeling a real I want to, is Reef. I haven't played Reef in forever.
I really like Reef.
Reef is rad.
See, with the bringing up Reef, I feel the same way about Azul. It's something that when I got it and played it with my wife, the first teach through after I read the rule book once, I don't think I referenced it until the end game scoring to see if there was anything that I missed, and I don't know that I remember that I did miss anything, because again, the game itself just expanded with the strategy options, but the simplicity of the game itself lent to the fun, and it led us down, getting it to the table more often, and stuff like that really, really says a lot about a game and the quality of it. Even if it's simple, it can still be a lot of fun and still offer strategy.
So one thing that when you're looking at, for me, simplicity and also trying to teach new players games is to help players that may not have a lot of experience with games understand, because the question a lot of them say, well, what's the best way to go about helping them understand in games? There isn't always, at least the games I like, there isn't a best. It's what path do you choose, and something like Century helps that, right? It's how are you going to get what you choose? There's lots of avenues to win.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Do you
what is
wanna-
the
Do you want to try and get do you want to save up your gems and get the
Right.
big guys and get the big points, or do you want to try and get a few smaller ones faster? And it's been a long enough time that I can't remember for sure, but I want to say that the end game triggers when someone gets 6 or 8 of the golems built, something like that. So essentially, there's a way to play where I look across and I go, hey, Russ is really saving up all his gems, and I can see that, it looks like he's going for one of these big guys. It's big points. If I can knock out 2 or 3 of these little guys before he can get that, I could end the game before he gets that big point push.
Yeah.
While I'm getting a few like little nickel and dime points, and that might be the strategy to end it. And that kind of strategic depth and being able to, there's not much in the way of hidden information. There's at best incomplete information because you see what your opponent, like you see the cards that your opponent takes to run their engine and stuff. Like there's nothing outright secret, but you end up with incomplete information unless you're really good at tracking what your opponent has, which would become extremely difficult with a full table of people playing the game.
Yeah.
But
you'd probably lose your own strategy by then too, chasing everyone else's.
But I mean, you can build your strategy, and you can still, without knowing every bit of information that's at the table, you can still look and see this person's upgrading a lot. They're going for some of these higher point guys. I can see that, and you can try and cut them off by getting, if I can get 2, 5-point guys before you can get that 10-point guy, then I have beat you in that particular race.
Right.
Yeah. I think if I could put my finger on what really attracted me to get into the hobby like I have, and then Wingspan for my wife has been kind of a gateway drug, we'll just call it that. Right? She's more open to a lot more games. She still has her favorites. She doesn't want to play a lot. She doesn't like she doesn't want to play the others or things like that. But it really clicked for her when you had the simplicity of Wingspan and her ability to see the combinations, because she played it and it was okay and she was willing to give it another. And then when we played it the second time, might have even been the third time, she came home from work and she's like, I have been thinking about that game all day. I have some ideas for birds. Can we play again? So it was like, there wasn't a best, right? That's why we like the hobby, at least in my opinion, is there isn't a sit down and there's not a best way to play. There's
multiple
tons
paths.
Of ways to play.
Yeah.
And if you can get new players to understand that with some of these simple games that have combos,
yeah,
like that's really what you enjoy. And then there's the deeper simplistic games like Teotihuacan, simple action, right? Move a dice, it goes up 1, you get whatever it is there. Fair warning, don't think and remember how simple it is and then pull it out and think you're just going to teach people that don't know games. But that game for me was, and I played it like a year or so ago, might even been longer, the first time. That really pushed me more into the Euros, because that game, for some reason, just really clicked with me. I absolutely love it. So the simplistic, I think it's overrated sometimes, underrated, because we have, Kevin likes his big, complex Kickstarter games, and like I enjoy some of them. But if we're 2 or 3 hours in and we're still just looking at the rules in one play, like, it might be a great game, but
to me,
too much.
There is a line. I mean, I can think of games that are on the extremes and some that kind of are in the middle, but I can't decide exactly where the line lies for me. I can think of examples on either side, but there is a line to be drawn between complexity and a game being convoluted.
Yeah.
To me,
definitely.
Court of the Dead was a convoluted game. There was just so many things that I don't have any desire to do that. I would rather do any 1 or 2 of the things in that game better than do all of them poorly, mediocre.
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't like a terrible execution of anything. It just wasn't a good execution of anything, and it certainly wasn't a good execution of all of it. Court of the Dead was convoluted. Pipeline is complex, and a lot of that is in the decision space. but I desperately want to play Pipeline.
We do
again.
one action, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
Well,
and I think
one to two actions.
for
I mean,
for me that is what great designers do.
Right.
Like Martin Wallace has complex games. A Study in Emerald, tons going on. On your turn, you do 2 actions. The depth of what you do provides the complexity. See, and that's, for me, if I'm looking for a game, I want simple turns or rounds, whatever you call it, and depth. And that's why, for me, there's designers that I really like, as opposed to types of games. Like anything with Eric Lang right now, Elizabeth Hargrove, like if she's coming out with a game, I want it. Stonemeyer,
So you're getting the new Butterflies one?
Mariposas, yeah, I'm going to pre-order that.
Nice.
Martin Wallace, I love his games. Super complex, but
not always. Look at Wildlands.
But there's depth to it. Like
Yeah.
simple, even Australia, which I love. I love that game. Complex, but simple what you do. It's easy to kind of get into.
Right.
Richard Garfield, simple, lots of depth.
Yeah, another game that I think of that is complex, but I really enjoy it, is A Feast for Odin. When you've got a worker placement board with like 70 different options or whatever it is, you're only doing one thing, but you have to choose from like 70 different things that you could do. That is complex. That is not a simple game. And then there's multiple strategies. There's different paths. There's the polyomino element of covering up part of your board. There's extra boards that you can get and basically sync your entire plan like Tyler did. And all of that is complex, but it never felt convoluted to me. Almost to a degree that every element has its own complexity, and then it's complex altogether also. Like A Feast for Odin is no joke. That is a heavy game. There was a lot going on, but it never felt like there was things that felt unnecessary for what you were doing, but there wasn't anything that felt unnecessary to the experience.
Sure.
You can focus on one thing or another, which kind of makes something else unnecessary. But that doesn't mean it's unnecessary in the game, because while you're focusing on strategy number 1, someone else is focusing on strategy number 2. And where they don't overlap, that doesn't mean they're not necessary.
Right.
Whereas with Court of the Dead, why was every phase of the turn a different game?
Yeah. Well, see, and I think of a game we all love. One of my favorite is Crusaders. There is, 4 actions? 4 actions, I think, you can do.
Yeah.
You use a rondelle to decide the action and how powerful that action is, but there's 4 actions that you have to learn. It's how well you do those actions.
Yeah, that's a really good one as far as the simplicity to simple actions to depth of strategy ratio.
Right.
That I love the way that it looks. I think it's beautiful. I think the components are great, but I do feel like that game could easily be a gateway game that is one of the first games that you teach someone, maybe not the first, but one of the first games. But the board does look intimidating to the untrained eye.
Yep, absolutely.
And I wouldn't ask for it to be different because I love it exactly how it is. But there's a version in my head with a simplified board or a cleaned up board or something, a different board that doesn't look as scary, because as simple as it is, it doesn't look that way. It doesn't convey its simplicity readily.
Well, and I think by turn 2 or 3, that fear of the unknown with the board itself kind of goes away. It gets washed away by what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you start to kind of understand where you want to go with it and what your strategy is going to be, which is awesome. And it lends itself to be more approachable in that way. And another game that comes to mind that we've talked about a little bit is Gates of Delirium. That one has a lot of simple choices, but there's enough depth in strategy that you can make many different choices. And, another one that comes to mind is Parks. It's not only gorgeous, but it's approachable in its simplicity and depth of strategy.
And theme. Like the
For
theme adds to
sure.
the approachability to it.
Well, and
Lot.
I brought that into work right before Christmas, and one of the guys that's a big war gamer walked through the warehouse today and was like, "Oh, I'm glad you said something about board games. I've got to get that Parks because it was so gorgeous, and I know that my family that doesn't game as much is gonna love it." And he just walked away, and he trailed off because he kept going, and I was still in my spot. But just the fact that that kind of thing is so it's attractive to gamers because we're interested in sharing the hobby.
Well, and I think that's important to understand that if you're trying to teach someone games, their base of information, most likely, at least if they're my age, is like Monopoly, Life, Candyland. There's not a lot of choices in there. Those it's a roll and move or worse, right? Not to say it's not enjoyable, but there's not that kind of connection and thought process.
Right.
Oh, if I do this, I get that.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, I rolled a 6, so I'm going to do better. And I think that is what makes great games is the depth, simplicity, and makes it really hard for great designers. As I mentioned before,
Yeah.
You look at that's pretty clever. Simple actions. The board is super intimidating. Or On Tour, which is probably the easiest game I have in my library to teach. On Tour is super easy to teach, but has been a hit with almost everybody I've played it with. And it kind of opens the doors. I've my extended family claims that I have my games, right? Well, they've bought Sagrada, they've bought all these other games that all of a sudden they are expanding, right?
They're shared games now.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was saying about like being able to have a contextual relation to whatever game you're playing. That's part of why like I feel if you are or intend to be like an ambassador for the hobby and try and get other people into it and show them the way to board gaming, as much as I didn't love it, you should play Lords of Waterdeep because for a lot of people who are getting into it, that's a game that they probably have played. Like a coworker of mine was like, she asked me one day, she was like, "So I hear that you're into board games," and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I work in a manual labor, traditionally tough guy, now tough guys and girls as of recently type of industry, so." I tend to not, like my geek flag doesn't fly quite as high when I'm at work, mostly because I just don't want to deal with it.
I can appreciate that as a machinist.
Yeah. So it was, "I hear you're into board games." "Yep." "Well, like what kind of board games?" And I was like, "All kinds." It's kind of one of those things that it's like, I need to know what you're picturing.
Let them break the ice.
Are you picturing me playing a lot of Monopoly and Sorry? Because if that's what you're picturing, then this conversation doesn't really need to happen. I'm not going to try and convince you that board games are great. I'm not going to try and teach you about modern board games if your interest goes as far as being aware of Monopoly and Sorry. But she said something like, "Yeah, me and my husband play board games too." And I was like, "Oh, cool. What are you guys into?" And she named off, I want to say, Catan, like Seven Wonders, like a handful of the known introductory type of games. And I was like, "Oh, you're like at some level, you're in the hobby,
right?"
And being able to then go, "All right, well, here's a picture of my game room that I recently set up, or my storage space for my games rather."
Right.
That I recently set up. And she was like, "Whoa, you are like way into games." I was like, "I know, I'm like way into games, But it was having that context, and knowing that she has played, Ticket to Ride, Catan, those kind of games. I have a better idea. Like, I don't necessarily need, if her and her husband were to come over and play games, I don't necessarily need to start with the most basic games.
Right.
I can start a little bit further along.
You can start on step 2.
I haven't I need to play Catan so that I have a better idea of what context that brings. But if you tell me you've played Lords of Waterdeep, I can probably get you into most of my worker placement games
Yeah.
because there is that base. If you tell me that you have played, Star Realms, I can I can bring a lot of the deck builders out, and with that context comes that added, like almost like a pseudo simplicity, just by having
Yeah.
the right.
Well, this goes
context.
back to one of the early conversations we had when we started the podcast. It's just because someone says they like a game, and this is notorious on Facebook. People say, "Well, I have money. What should I get?" Well, what do you like about a certain game? Because there'll be something else. Theme may be completely different, but it will share, right? Like, what do you like about that game that you may want to venture into?
Right.
Maybe something else. You like deck builders. Have you tried Mystic Vale? Same kind of mechanic, but instead of building the deck, you're building your cards.
Right.
So those kind of things are important. And if you want to play Catan, we should play Game of Thrones Catan. I think you'd be down with that one.
I'd be down to try. I'm down to try any game. I mean, whether or not I like it, I think I'm at a point in the hobby and in my gaming career, for lack of better words, that there's a value to be gleaned from every experience, including the bad ones. So
Yeah.
I'm always down to play anything.
I've kind of
sure.
gone from where maybe a year and a half ago or so, I wanted the really complex, right? Like Cerebrium, those kind of games. But I've really come around to feeling the magic of simplicity with depth. To where, we're going to break out this game we haven't played in 6 months. Let's spend 45 minutes on the rules to make sure we're refreshed on it and ready to go.
Yeah, I like both, but not all the time.
Yeah.
Like I want to be ready, and I want other people to be ready if I'm going to play a genuinely like complex game. But
The nights when we get like 4 or 5 plays in,
those are nice.
like I really enjoy those.
Yeah. And like I would definitely trade the occasional one of those for a play of, Twilight Imperium, which is a much more grand game, and you're going to get one play in a night unless you're a maniac.
There are TI, see, that's a
one
tough one because
it's complex.
there
It
is
is absolutely a
simplicity to
complex
it, though.
game, but
there is simplicity to it.
it's
I mean, it's not a simple game. For
it's
sure.
well executed complexity is what it is. It's
clean,
complex without being convoluted. But yeah, I'm down to trade the occasional. I want to get more of the play 4 to 6 games nights, but I absolutely am down to trade one of those every so often for a TI, for a dominant species, assuming that I like it, for a Game of Thrones, assuming that I like it. Those games that aren't hitting the table because you have to dedicate an entire night and
Sure.
you're losing out on those other 3, 4, 5 games that you could be playing.
Right. Well, what are a couple of your favorite games with simple elements, either mechanics, rules, whatever it might be? What's a couple of things that you might not have talked about already?
Another one that's got really good simplicity. It's another more abstract, easy to teach, lots of strategic depth. Is War Chest. War Chest is
Awesome
is
choice.
is a really good one that I would recommend. I don't quite think it's simple enough for like if this is the first game that you are buying without having someone that is your like gaming guru leader, like
liaison of sorts. Yeah.
If you don't have someone kind of guiding you into the hobby, I don't know that I'd jump straight into War Chest, but I would absolutely be confident teaching War Chest to someone like my dad, who, as far as I know, has zero interest in any board game at all.
Right.
I'd be confident being like, hey, let's try this. It's a battle of the minds. There's a couple of variabilities. Let's go for it.
Right.
You know?
For me, if you're looking at something, economic, something with a market, I'm going to go with Raccoon Tycoon. If I'm going to go for something that's more along the lines of, solving a crime, I'm going to lean into Chronicles of Crime. And
Well, that's a really narrow subject to go for solving a crime.
well,
I mean, in
there's
today's
so
day and
many
age,
of
there
those
are.
games now that have come out with that type of game. It's, and to throw back to an older version of that, like you've got that Sherlock Holmes, that
Yeah.
consulting detective that's been around forever. So
Yeah, and you can go further back and go to Clue and stuff like
sure,
that. So.
yeah. So along those lines, I would lean towards Chronicles of Crime because it's a simple game, but it's got a lot of depth in strategy and options and things that you can do as a team too.
Yeah, I've yet to play that one, but Raccoon Tycoon is such a solid choice for a simple game with lots of depth and stuff.
I agree, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, that helps.
What about you, Russ?
So for ones that I haven't talked about, because you've mentioned some that I was thinking as well, with like Parks, and then on tour, Ethnos, I really enjoy because it's really simple: draw a card or play cards. So it's that easy kind of turn,
Right.
And that one also, as a gateway game, as weird as it sounds, kind of bridges that theme gap. Like if someone's afraid to jump into like fantasy, where it's orcs and giants, and I find that kind of helpful in that way too.
It would also be a good step toward, if someone is confrontation averse, it's kind of a step in that direction without being a straight up like combat game.
Yeah.
Without being totally confrontational.
Yeah.
A few others. Formula D is a great one because it's basically a roll and move with strategy and how big you want your dice to be. Like pressure luck a little bit in there too. I really like Exchange, right? Which is kind of maybe a party game, like a stock exchange party game, because it can play up to 6 or so. But that one, I will be writing articles and stuff coming up this summer on that one as it releases from Bicycle. But Exchange is a really good one. And then Sheriff has always been a hit to break the ice on games because it's that lie, push your luck situation. And then I would say really simple one or two would be Ice Cool, where you just flick the penguin.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough strategy that I, as a gamer, enjoy it. And then Drop It. Drop It is probably the easiest game to teach, and people are always become really enthralled with the strategy behind it, because at first it looks like you're just dropping little shapes in, and then you start to figure out strategy, and it becomes fun.
That's awesome.
So
one other one that I would like to throw in that's been a recent smash hit is World Championship Russian Roulette.
Oh, that one's so good.
That's another one that's simple, very simple. I mean, bluffing with like a little bit of a betting and push your luck, and it's just it's so good.
Funny thing about that, I've listed a bunch of games that I'm trying to sell or trade at the moment, and I did not have that anywhere near my list in any sort of context.
Offer it for you?
No, somebody from the Philippines asked me if I had it in my list of games. So that game's reputation's got to reach. So
I want that game.
Yeah. So I mean, I had to sadly tell them no, and I can't get it myself here in the States.
My last play, that last Saturday,
yeah,
my play was not great because I kind of went really risky. Yeah, it was not a great idea. And then Ken decided to kill me off for no apparent reason.
I played very conservatively, and then I just happened to play a card to shoot at Russ, and I happened to be right. Like if I wouldn't have played that card, I would have killed myself. But Russ had done something to antagonize me right before that, so I was like, all right, I have a feeling I'm going to play this card right now, and I'm going to do the thing, and it executed Russ, and it was fantastic.
That's awesome.
I would say maybe not for non-gamers, even though I love drafting games for teaching people stuff, Sushi Go, Ancestry. One game that has become one of my favorite icebreakers for the night, and I love to play it early is Carnival of Monsters. Like
sure.
if you enjoy drafting games and it's not in your library and I think we were playing like a 5-player game in like 25, 30 minutes. And it's so good. Part of me just is bugged that it's not doing as well because I want an expansion with more like employees and stuff. But that's a good one. If you enjoy, maybe are looking for simpler ones to add to your gamer library.
We'll just keep doing our part and spreading the word about how good of a game it is. Not only art, but everything else about it. Awesome. Well, thanks again for listening. Let us know if you enjoyed the new format, if simplicity is better for the show or not. Please rate and review the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever podcatcher that you use, or simply send us an email to thelategamepodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us at thelategamepodcast.com and at The Late Game Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks again for staying up with The Late Game.
You either die a hero or you get enough expansions to become the villain.
That's a good way to put it.